Sanjoy Hazarika had in fact introduced the Northeast to the world through his writings and reportage. He is currently International Director of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. He is the founder, director of the Center of Northeast Studies and Policy Research at Jamia Millia Islamia, member of the Jeevan Reddy Committee to review the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, and former member of the National Security Advisory Board. He has made more than a dozen documentaries on human rights and conflict. He also designed and developed the unique Boat Clinics initiative in 2005 on the Brahmaputra. So journalist and author, Hazarika is regarded as an expert on the Northeast. He has authored a number of books, including the latest, Strangers No More, New Narratives from India's Northeast, published 25 years after his acclaimed Strangers of the Mist. Other books include Writing on the Wall, Rites of Passage, and Bhopal, The Lessons of a Tragedy. Our second panelist is Nilanjan P. Choudhury. His most recent novel, Shillong Times, is a coming-of-age story set against the insider-outsider conflict in Shillong in the 1980s. And Nilanjan confesses to having studied at IIM Ahmedabad and IIT Kanpur and hopes that this will not be held against him. He grew up in Shillong and now lives in Bangalore with his family. So welcome to this session. And before we start off, I would like to, since we are talking about belongingness, I would like to ask both Nilanjan and Sanjoy about, since both of you have now more or less settled outside the Northeast, you are more or less outside the Northeast for several years. So where do you find yourself, that sense of belongingness? Do you think you belong to the Northeast, or do you think you belong to Delhi, or what is it? Where is that sense of belongingness now?
I certainly don't belong to Delhi. I was an outsider when I came. I remain an outsider. Still can't speak Hindi properly. When I first came here, I asked people for badam. Badam in Assam means peanuts, mungpali. So the fellow gave me peanuts. I said, gave me almonds. And I said, no, I want badam. He said, this is badam. So there is, that disconnect. I know now what badam is almonds, and mungpali is peanuts. But that's in a lighter vein. I feel really at home when I'm in Shillong. That's where my parental home is. It's where my brother is. It's where I feel most comfortable, and my best friends are there. My oldest friends, my school is there. And despite all the turmoil and difficulties and challenges that Shillong and the Northeast go through, for me, it's still home. It's the place where I sleep the best. And, home is where you sleep most comfortably and most relaxed. So, yeah, a long explanation, but that's where I am.
And Nilanjan?
And I was telling you this, sorry, Nilanjan. I'm trying to get to Shillong in the pandemic, but because of all the restrictions, I have given up, because I'll go into quarantine, but I won't even probably get to Shillong because I'll be stopped at the border for various reasons. So, that's really a challenge. Sorry, Nilanjan.
Okay. And
well,
yeah,
in my case, if I have to be honest, it's in certain ways, a halfway home for me between Shillong and Bangalore, or two homes both. I've been now staying in Bangalore almost the same time that I stayed, in fact, longer in Bangalore now than I had stayed in Shillong. I left at the age of 18. And I think now my heart is half of Bangalore, Namma Bangalore, and half of my old Shillong. I've always found Bangalore to be among the most welcoming, warm city. I know once in a while we hear of something or the other that happens to people who can be identified by their facial features as being from the Northeast. Happening recently, something happened in Mysore, and about a couple of years ago, something happened here itself at the railway station. But personally, I have found Bangalore to be a very warm and welcoming place. But Shillong is where my roots are, in a way. Bangalore is where my wings have been. And I think anybody who's grown up, I can't speak for the whole of the Northeast, although my wife expresses similar sentiments from where she came, which is Mokokchung in Nagaland. And I think none of us can ever leave behind, these places which I think were touched with a bit of magic, especially in the time that I was growing up in, which really didn't have all these technological interventions and intrusions and so on and so forth. So there were just people, nature, books, and games and stuff like that. So I carry that piece of with me all the time, and whenever I go there, I also sleep very, very soundly. We still, like Sanjoy, we still have our house in Jail Road. It has a tin roof, Assam type bungalow, one of the few left. And once in a while, when it is, there's a hailstorm and you can hear the sound of the hailstones on the tin roof, there is no better feeling.
So, Sanjoy, I would like to come back to you. I mean, even after so many years of independence, even after you've been writing so much about the Northeast, and there's been a surge in the literature from the Northeast. But in spite of that, we still have to have a discussion on understanding the Northeast. So, what do you think is missing? Why are we still discussing understanding the Northeast? Sanjoy.
Well, are very complex regions, have very complex communities, societies, people, individuals, groups. But more than that, I think my own reading is that I've been talking and writing and making films and having these kind of discussions on television festivals and all that for years now, many years. Organized festivals of the Northeast in Delhi and elsewhere. But the thing is that every year, every decade, the new narrative has to be forged and driven. We can't slacken up, because there will always be people who won't know. And it's not the fact that we are not telling the stories or they're not, but there is just so many things happening that people have other issues that they focus on, frankly speaking. That's one. The second thing is that what is really good these days is I'm really happy to see young people engaging, disputing, challenging the idea of India, the concerns that they face. Like 20 years ago, if a person from the region we call the Northeast, that's also a problematic description, Northeast, north of what, east of where. Not many people would be coming to their help or raising their voices today. Nobody tries to do that. They will, whether it's social media or the wonderful activism and acumen and capacity of younger people at the university level, all across the country. If there is an element of discrimination, it will be contested, it will be challenged, and people will go to court or to the. So I think that's a very, very important thing. And people from the region are writing. It's not mainland rewriting about the region. The region is speaking for itself and carrying those stories to the rest of the world, not just to India. So yeah, I mean, we constantly, like for instance, in the vernacular media, there's very little that is written about the Northeast. I wish the region we call the Northeast, but I wish more could be in vernacular, in what we call the state languages of the country, because that's where I think the challenge really lies.
And Nilanjan, you've been living outside in Bangalore for quite some time now. So this whole insider-outsider binary, it's like universal now,
Yeah.
So all of us are insider or outsider in some other sense, either socially or politically. So did you ever witness this in your life outside the Northeast, this insider-outsider binary?
Well, sometimes yes. In fact, I would say quite often yes, and for different reasons. because these labels can be easily stuck on by people who just want to quickly put you in a box, whatever be that box. So, like I was mentioning, I've been called a Bangladeshi, a Lushai, and various other things. I've been called a Bangladeshi in all places, of all places, in Singapore, in the plush confines of a multinational company in which I was working, because I mean, I was called Bangla being a derogatory term to some of the poorly paid blue collar workers who often migrate illegally from Bangladesh into Singapore, and indeed across many parts of the world, including India. And this conflation of language to ethnicity to region, and a quick labeling of this whole foreigner Bangladeshi business happens not just in the Northeast, where it has happened and continues to happen even now, but even elsewhere in India, where the consciousness of this is quite high. I mean, very recently we had a local MLA from here, a very firebrand type of MLA, who made a threat that he would he would throw out all Bangladeshis, which in fact then extended itself to people who are pretty much anywhere from the East, and not even a different country. So these sort of things happen. I mean, when I went to study in Kanpur, there was a lot of confusion as to what was I. I mean, they had heard of Lushai for some reason, and so they would ask me if I was a Lushai. You had these same conversations around, Indian children apparently asked in America whether they went to school on elephants. So I have been asked multiple times whether we eat dogs or not. So although I think these things are receding, I think in the film Akhuni, which we were talking about yesterday, some of these conflicts of what happens to people from the region when they go outside has also been talked about in great depth. But I mean, I personally think there is a line one needs to draw between ignorance, which is willful, versus just an absence of enough discourse happening around this, or somebody trying to deliberately insult you. And it's important not to have a sense of victimhood to the extent possible. That's something that I've always tried to retain, whether I was in Shillong or outside it.
Mm-hmm. Sanjoy, you had recently written about the contemporariness of the outsider and insider in the narratives flowing in and around the Northeastern region. How does it have a bearing on the way Northeast is perceived today?
But it's not just the region, I mean, we are part of a larger whole, and we are part of that whole. I mean, what I see, whether it's in physical terms or in terms of engagement with issues, there is a greater engagement with the processes, the issues, the ideas that make up this country, and there are many ideas, there are many themes, there are many narratives, and there's engagement, there's opposition, there's resistance, there is acknowledgement, there is support in some ways. And I think that's that's very important, because we, an earlier generation fought against the idea of India, earlier generations. And today, at least at various levels, whether it's the university, the media, or civil society groups, legal, etc., media, you are having people who are able to engage, frankly and strongly and robustly on these issues. And frankly, I was just looking at some statistics the other day. I don't know how many of us know that we're a population of 130 crore, right? 1.3 billion people. Nearly half that population are migrants. That means we are all people who've come from somewhere else and have gone somewhere else. My daughter is living somewhere else. My ancestors came from UP. My father settled in Shillong. I'm in Delhi. So we are all, we are all in some form in whether it's internal or external, we are migrants. Now, there is one thing, which is that you can be a migrant within a state. Like you can go from one part of the state to the other, like from Tezpur to Guwahati, like you. Or you can be a migrant like Nilanjan or me, which is like you move from Shillong to Delhi or somewhere else. So, you know, these are, and people move for many reasons, for studies, for love, for marriage, for work, and so on. The list goes on. So yeah, it's a very complex issue, and we are always, I don't say scratching the surface, but we are, it's multi-layered, you know, and we can't just have just one, this approach that it's a binary. It's not a binary, it's multiple complexities and multiplicities that make it so challenging. Mm-hmm. And to tell our story is very challenging, you know. I mean, we are 250 plus ethnic groups. I mean, who can speak for that? Mm. It's very, very challenging.
Very challenging. Definitely. And actually, as Nilanjan had mentioned, Northeast India is in news of late, not for bloodshed or violence, but for a film which is based on food. So the latest film, Akhoni, now being screened on Netflix, it's a pioneering attempt by a young filmmaker from the region. However, many from the Northeast feel outraged by the treatment of the film. So how do you see this criticism? Have you seen Akhoni, Sanjoy?
I'm afraid that I've seen the trailer. I've been promising every night, including yesterday when he had the discussion, to watch it. But last night I had a meeting with my executive board in the UK, one of the boards, that went on till midnight. So I'm afraid I could not see it. But I have met Nicholas and I know about the film. But Nilanjan, and you have seen it. So I'll be interested in what you have to say. Teresa, rather than asking us questions, we should ask you a couple.
No, but you are a filmmaker too, so I thought you would have.
No, I have an approach. Let Nilanjan say something. I've been hogging the talk show so far. After that, you should speak, and then I'll come up because I have something very simple to say about films.
So I watched it, and I find it very difficult to put myself in the place of a critic, because in my own little ways I try and create something, and I know what sort of blood, sweat and tears somebody goes through in the process of creation, which is not to paper over poor quality or things like that. But in my view, Akhoni is a very important film. I think it's a really brave attempt, a bold attempt to bring a story from the Northeast, and in that particular film there are various regions and states and various people from the Northeast who are represented. It's like the salad bowl in a sense has been presented to you, and he's used the power of streaming and these new digital mediums to bring these sort of stories out into the open, which I think 20 years of writing, 30 years of writing haven't been able to do. It's been able to reach out to significant numbers of people, and it's received a whole lot of attention from people. That in itself, I think, is a very significant and an important step. Of course, there are a couple of flaws in the film, but I also think that my sense is, and I haven't really spoken to him about this, but my sense is that there is a lot of honesty in the film, I thought. And I think a fair amount of it came from lived experiences. A fair amount of it also came from, I think, Nicholas having stayed outside the Northeast for a while now. And, the sort of Stockholm syndrome that people have talked about, which comes towards the end of the film, and it has been described in harsher terms. I think we should be generous and kind enough to see the potential for good in people, and I think that's what he's tried to depict. Whether it has been not so artistically clever, whether it hasn't been done in as subtle a way as it could be is another matter. But I think the film has its heart in the right place, and that to me is really what counts.
Mm-hmm. And Sanjoy, I'll come to you again. So, as a filmmaker, do you think
No,
cinema
you
is a
can't
power?
get away now. You've seen the film. I haven't. So you should speak now about what you think about it. Don't try and get away from a controversy or something.
No, it's not a controversy. It's just that, I have lived in Delhi and studied in Delhi for quite some time. So I can, I can really, what do you say? I can, I can, it's like, yeah, it happens, this is what happened to many of my friends too. So I think he has tried to portray the reality, and he used a bit of humor, and he also used, I think it's, but yeah, maybe like I was a Northeasterner living in Delhi, but I didn't look like a Northeasterner. So there are other, factors which come into play. So, but still, I think it's a very good effort, and we should not discourage him. And obviously, it's a work of fiction, as he says. So let's give him that liberty, that artistic freedom. And we come back to you, Sanjoy. How do you feel? Do you think that cinema can be a powerful medium to tell our stories? And do you
Cinema,
think people want to tell their stories?
Everybody wants to tell the story. Have you met a single person in your life who doesn't want to tell the story, whether it's a child or someone, to you or to somebody else? Everybody wants to say. Everybody has a story. Whether they tell it or not is a different thing. But they want, that is inside them, there is an urge. Like even, I'll tell you something. When I was making a documentary, it's called, there are two documentaries which really remain in my mind recently. One is called Ramboy, which is about Mizoram and the lived Mizo experience during the crackdown on the Mizo Hills in the 1960s, and then the insurgency, and also a measure of impunity, which is about in the impact of conflict on women in Assam and Nagaland. Now, we went to villages, we went talked to people, and what we found really disturbing and humbling was that people came to us and talked about things that had happened to them 20, 30 years ago, which they had not spoken of to their own family members. Women who are now older, men who are much older now, younger people, sleepless nights dealing with these problems. But you realize that there is a 5-letter word: trust. In a documentary film process, much more than perhaps a commercial film, a feature film, unless it's a docu-feature, the element of trust with the subject needs to be there. You have to be empathic to the subject that you're treating, to the stories that you're listening to. Otherwise, how will they tell you the story if they don't trust you? That's one. The second thing is, so I have been criticized for some of my films and writings and so on. But see, my view on this is very simple. Either you have freedom of expression or you don't. There's no just halfway house. You can't have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I haven't seen the film, so I'm not going to comment on it. I've seen a lot of commentaries and very learned reviews by young scholars and older scholars, critiquing it and attacking it and so on. So I'm not going to get into that because I haven't seen the film. But what I will say is that this is the first film of its kind. There are bound to be problems. I remember we were making this film on Mizoram on a very sensitive subject. And I showed it, the first screening, the second screening was to an audience of 1,000 people in the university. At the end of it, you could just hear silence and people crying, because nobody many of these young people had never even heard these stories because their parents hadn't told them. And I say that this is a first of its kind film. We've had many great films by great filmmakers like Haribam Shyam Sharma and Janu Barua, Santwana Bodloy and others. But I think that there are many more films to be made. So if you have a problem with the film, please understand, go and make another one, make a better one. Don't just sit and criticize it just because you don't agree with it. I don't have a problem with criticism. And, you know, Nicholas should go on and make other films on whatever else he wants to, and it may not be the Northeast. So yeah, criticism should be welcomed, but it shouldn't stop there. If you think you can do better, do it. You know, then you'll understand what a filmmaker's life is like. It is not an easy life. From getting the money to getting your people to getting the crew, all these are very, very difficult and challenging issues.
Actually, on your, I was just reminded of something that had happened about a year and a half ago. When you spoke of criticism and freedom of expression, I think it's the first time I'm telling someone, which is suddenly I got a call from my publisher saying that, can you just speak to this person, one of the 2 bookstores that are now left in Shillong, physical bookstores, that he has stocks of your book and he's not able to sell them because there was a sort of warning given to him by what the publisher said was a local NGO. And I called up the chap, the bookshop owner, and he just refused to take my call. This is 2019 that we're talking about, and I'm writing of something that happened maybe 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. And I was really surprised. And then I asked the book publisher sometime later that, so what's happening now, about 2 months later? He said he's still selling it, but he's hiding it because he has the stock and he has to sell it, and there are people asking for it. But I was just struck by this when you spoke about the film on Mizoram. I don't know if I've seen it. Is this the one that talks of the famine and how they were eating?
Yeah, that's the one. The famine and the bombing of
the shelling by the Indian Air Force and stuff like that. And you're right, because you mentioned this whole thing of people who were moved to tears. I was struck by this fact that people were moved by this small little book. I'm not famous. The book is not famous, but yet it attracted the attention of this NGO who wanted to, push it under. So, in fact, when I went to Shillong for the book launch, there were some young people, and in many ways, Shillong is transformed now, and some ways for the good, some ways not so much for the good. But one of the things that has happened, I think, is that the peace has returned in a substantial way, apart from a few skirmishes here and there. And in that peace, there are young people who've grown up, and they said this thing that you talk about, we don't recognize. I mean, you're talking of stereotypes of Khasis versus Bengalis and stuff like that. So I said, well, if that's what you think, that's what you think. But you have to make of your life what I have made of my life, and you have to write your own stories. And with coming back to what you asked, why do we need to keep explaining or writing more and doing more on the Northeast? Because the situation is changing, and these stories that Sanjoy spoke about, that everybody wants to talk about, they're changing all the time.
And I think internet has opened up a lot of possibilities.
Teresa, if I might come in, I think Nilanjan is very modest about his book. It's a wonderful, it's a small book, but it's a wonderful book, and I really recommend people. I hope they can read it. They'll enjoy it. They may not agree with it. That's a different thing, but enjoy it.
In fact, I wanted to ask Nilanjan about his book, because it is said that life is much easier with a sense of humor. So your novel, Shillong Times, is said to be peppered humor. So it is all, the tagline is, it's a story of friendship and fear. So you're constantly laughing at the quirks of the melting pot that you grew up in the backdrop of ethnic violence. So what made you choose humor to tell your story? Because we don't find too much of humor in the literature that's coming out from the Northeast.
I mean, the short answer to that, I think, is, chemical locha. Why somebody likes something and doesn't like something else is very difficult to explain. But I mean, there are many reasons why I find humor as a wonderful way to not only to write but also to live life by. I mean, there are influences of my father, the influences of my early readings, there are influences of the many nonsense prose and poetry of Sukumar Ray and stuff like that. But not to go there. I mean, I have always lived done my writing following this precept, which this French writer Rabelais mentioned once: for all your woes, I give you laughter. So I find laughter is the best way to to negotiate through what you might call the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. And I think Shillong naturally had Shillong Times. Many of those situations and people are based on real life incidents and people, and somehow it was the those times where I think the whole interpersonal interactions were a lot more. It's not that they're not there today, but it was, I think, a lot more, being a small town, a small community, and often a small community which was ghettoized, which was under curfew. And stressful times often bring out the need for people to have a laugh about it or to see the funny thing of dark side, so of a dark situation. So I think some of that crept into me through the process of osmosis, and came out in the book.
Mm-hmm. In fact, that film, Akhoni, if I come back to it again, it has raised questions about racism all over again. Whatever happened to Nido Tanya and the instances of everyday racism that people who look different face in big cities. So Sanjoy, how would you address this? I mean, have you been able to? Is it how do you see racism being affecting lives of people from the Northeast in big cities?
It's not just the Northeast. No? I mean, I remember this at a time when you could read newspapers, when the newspapers would come to you. Now many people have stopped reading newspapers because they think the virus is going to come to them through the paper. But you read the Sunday Times of India, you look at the classified ads, and you'll find matrimonial ads, no? Look at the matrimonial ads. You look at groom seeks fair bride, age no bar kind of thing. Everywhere in this country, in many parts of the world, fairness is regarded as a kind of virtue. And it's a good thing that whatever that company is, they are discontinuing their Fair and Lovely ad, as a result of this tragedy that took place in the US, which has had some impact here as well. So I think we need to do much more of, there is a sense of racism which is there in many parts of the country. And we need to constantly combat it and raise issues about it. And, there is, when I was at Jamia Millia, we did this study on women from the region in 6 cities, 4 cities, and then again in 7 more, about what they felt concerned about. And many of them felt, this sense of prejudice in attitudes of people, whether it was the landlord or the taxi driver or the local grocer. But they also talked of good things. But the one thing they were very clear about was that they would not like to go to the police. And although many of these the subjects were women, the survey was on women, although many of them said that they had felt discrimination and they had suffered some form of molestation. Many, I think it was, I don't remember the figure right now, but I think it's more than 70 or 75% said that they would encourage relatives to come to metro cities to live here, because people are leaving because of, lack of opportunities. Why do people go away? Why do people travel? Why do they take risks to come here or anywhere else? Because they want a break. They want to make something of their lives, whether it's through studies and so on. So I think that this is an issue that really needs constant attention. You need to constantly battle it. You have to use the law. There are laws on this. When the Nidiotani and other incidents took place, I was talking about the need to use existing laws. There is the Prevention of Atrocities Against Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes, which exist, and it's a very strong law now. I may not agree with the exact the nature of it right now, but it's there, and there are other laws which ban discrimination and harmful approaches to people. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think you must also tell us about the boat clinics. That's a commendable job, and the healthcare, because of your boat clinics, healthcare has been able to has been made accessible to people living in remote islands as well. So please tell us something briefly about your boat clinics.
Okay. Actually, there is an element of discrimination here also. Many years ago, Jahnu Barua and I were traveling. We were making this film on the Brahmaputra, and we traveled in a ferry to go to Majuli, the island in the heart of the river. And one of the stories we heard while traveling across to Majuli was that of this young woman who died in childbirth because she couldn't get to the hospital on time. And we basically were very deeply affected by this story. The next day, the more details came out, and the stories was even more compelling and more tragic, which was this young woman had had a difficult pregnancy. She was carried from her home in a village on a stretcher to the ferry ghat. They missed the ferry, so that night, on a winter night by the Brahmaputra, it's very cold, it's damp. They had to stay the night. The next morning, they caught the ferry, but she didn't survive the journey. So the family lost a daughter and her child, unborn. And to me, that was really unacceptable. So I started doing some research on this, and I found, to my absolute horror, that Assam had the worst maternal mortality ratio in India. We say we pride ourselves on the dignity of the Assamese women and that they are as great equality and so on. But you look at the facts, the more women dying in childbirth in Assam per ratio than any other part of the country. And it was 492 nearly 16 or 17 years ago. Today it's dropped to under about 200 or less. And I also did some research on who were these people who lived on these islands. And it's a range of populations and communities. And 1/10 of the population of Assam lives on islands. Not many people in Assam know that. And they're not just, of one community, they're all communities. So I said that, we need to have an intervention that gets healthcare to people on the islands, because they suffer from a double whammy, social exclusion and geographic exclusion. And the only way I realized you could get healthcare or any kind of facility to communities on islands was very simple. It had to be by boat. You can't build bridges. You can't take it by helicopter. You can't do it certainly by laying roads. And that's how it started. We built our first boat clinic in 2004-05. Today we have 15 boat clinics. We reach about 300,000 people with healthcare every year. And the maternal mortality ratio, because of, not just because of us, but because of many interventions by the government and the National Health Mission, has dropped from 400, nearly 500 to 200. So yeah, there are things that can be done, and they can be done well and successfully with local people and local intervention. This is just an idea I had, and it worked. So,
okay. So I think I'll have to intervene here. We are having questions now. We have questions from the audience. So this is for both panelists. Since you both work with fiction, work with different forms of literature, fiction and non-fiction, could each of you say a little bit about what you think the form you work in makes possible with regards to representing the Northeast? So can we start with Nilanjan? What do you think?
Well, so this is my third book, my third novel, which happens to be in the Northeast. The others were, a thriller and a detective book and so on. And I have always leaned towards fiction, even if they're, and obviously everything will describe real life, but even if they're more closely linked to real life and history, as it were, especially when it comes to Shillong Times. Primarily because I find fiction offers a lot more space, and this is true of whatever you're writing, whether it is about the Northeast or not. And it offers space because you can get into the minds of people. You can talk about what they're feeling, thinking, and so on and so forth. Not that you can't do it in a documented form, but I mean, this is the reason why fiction is written, to talk about human journeys and things like that in a more deep way. So that's the space that it offers me, that fiction offers has helped. And I think particularly when it comes to the Northeast, because some of the topics were sensitive, like I said, there was some move to get sales blocked. You can, I believe the term is Romana clef, where you basically use devices such as, changing the names of easily recognizable characters and places and incidents and things like that, to protect yourself in various ways. India can be a slightly prickly, sensitive country, especially when you're talking of sensitive things. So things that you may not be able to do in non-fiction is possible to do in fiction. In fact, the editor was so perturbed for whatever, I don't know what happened to him. He said, change the name of the school to something else. I mean, the school plays his and mine school, both, St. Edmunds. The editor insisted on changing it to St. Edwards. And Loreto Convent, which was the other school, the editor forced it to change it to Loretta Convent, and so on and so forth. So those are just some flexibilities that fiction offers you, I think, in terms of telling deep human stories. I can't speak for non-fiction. I have never gone there.
So maybe Sanjoy can speak about non-fiction. He's written so many books. And as I said, he has literally introduced Northeast to the world. So
I'm trying to look at the question. What makes you think the form your work makes problem possible with regards to representing? I don't claim to represent. I write for myself. I write my views, my concerns, my understanding, my reflection, my travels, my journeys. And I say that this is what I think. I don't claim to represent, the Northeast. So that's a disclaimer at the beginning. The second thing is that I can't write fiction. It needs a particular skill which Nilanjan has and I don't. I'm trying to write a book of fairy tales, and if my daughter hears this, she'll be really angry, because she'll say, you've been telling me the same thing for the last 20 years. You haven't written the story, the fairy tale story. It's actually about 10 chapters written, and I need to come to a conclusion. So that's the only fiction I'm doing. Non-fiction, to me, comes very naturally to me. Because I'm a journalist. whether you believe them or not, don't write fiction. Most of them actually are non-fiction. You may not, if you watch some of the broadcasters today, you may think you're in some other fictional world that they're creating. But actually, a good journalist is a storyteller. And at the heart of it, we're all storytellers, and that's how I approach my work. There are times when I sit and write, sometimes night, because I'm so fascinated by the story as it unfolds, and layers of thought come, which you try and weave into the narrative, then you go back and forth. And of course, the editor has the final say because they know better about the flow of a narrative. So yeah, that's the way I write from the heart, but I write with a very strong focus on research and understanding what people go through.
But I just have to give a small addition that it's your book, Strangers of the Mist, which in certain ways was responsible for my fiction book, Shillong Times. I've always been very, very inspired by it and have learned a lot from it.
So,
That's
Nilanjan,
very kind of you. Sorry.
there's this question for Nilanjan, I think. I'll pose it to Nilanjan. A bulk of the Northeast discussion is about Northeast versus the mainland. But what is the kind of othering that exists within the Northeastern region between different races, etc.? And what could be done to foster inclusion?
Yeah, the problem with answering a wider question like that is because my experience is not as wide as yours or Sanjoy, as I can only speak of a little bit about Shillong and the whole othering that has been a lived experience for many of us who grew up in Shillong. And I know it sounds a little like a broken record, but that's really that is really what I wrote about as Shillong Times, which is the whole othering that happened between the Khasi and the non-tribal communities during those years. Much of, I think, a good deal of which has subsided now. I mean, I don't know if that's true in every single aspect, but certainly that it is impossible to recognize the Shillong of today from what it was when shutters would be down and we used to go into extended, we were used to lockdowns and curfews for all my growing up years. I was telling my daughter the other day that we went through a 1 year lockdown of schools and colleges where we didn't have classes or anything, and we studied from home without the benefit of Skype and stuff like that for a year. And this really had to do with the othering that I think the question is asking about within the Northeast of the different communities that stay there. I also think that I don't know how, but there is not much understanding or empathy that different communities within the Northeast have of themselves. I was speaking, for example, with Parismita today, Parismita Singh, who's the novelist. She stays in Guwahati. She wrote about the Bodoland. She writes about Bodoland. She's written about other communities on the Northeast, of which I personally am not aware of. So I think the whole business of othering, given that there are so many communities, 250 plus, like Sanjoy mentioned, coexist together with very different cultures, very different ways of life. But I think almost in watertight compartments. I mean, I don't know how much give and take there is between, let's say, Nagaland and Meghalaya, or Tripura and Assam, in terms of just understanding the cultures of these places, which are very different.
I think this is one question that I would
Can
like
I just
to ask
make one addition to what Nilanjan said?
Yeah.
Is that even if you just read the media of the Northeast, the print media, if you read the main papers in Assam, which is the largest state, you will think that there is only Assam. If you go to Nagaland and read the newspapers or watch the media there, you will think it's only this, and maybe there are a few other states. So, we don't do a very good story of telling our own story to ourselves, to each other. And I think there's a lot of space for that. Forget about what the media and the rest of the country is talking about us. We need to be much more open in how we report and reach out to what's happening in other states. Sorry,
Definitely.
Teresa.
No, that's fine.
No, you're absolutely right. I can't resist saying this just for one short thing, that we used to have 3-month-long winter holidays in Shillong when we were growing up, and they were wonderful times. But in all those 3 months, my mother and father used to get LTC. So we went around to all these wonderful places like Bombay, Delhi, Madras, Hyderabad, Trivandrum, Bangalore, and so on our holidays. We hardly went anywhere out in the Northeast to the other states of the Northeast, because for whatever reasons, be close to home, not good enough seeing what are you going to see there, jungles here, jungles there. So this was my own mindset, and I confess that I confess my ignorance freely. But I think I am not limited in my ignorance, and that's what I think is the basis of this whole othering.
And Sanjoy, I would like to ask you this question. What do you think are the barriers to getting the Northeast into the contemporary popular imaginations of India? For example, Akhoni was really interesting to watch for me, but the first time I've seen the Northeast as a subject on popular discourse versus academic political discourse, it is usually seen in. So, can you comment on this?
I think that was a comment rather than a question. I mean,
Yeah.
I think today, this evening, we've been discussing the barriers. Whether, see, the strange thing is we are still talking, and we will be for quite some time to come, perhaps, about the same issues in different nuances. The core of the issue hasn't changed. It's the nuancing, and the generations have changed. The telling of the story is almost the same. It's just who is telling it has become different. And I'm talking about the issue of discrimination and representation. And it takes generations for these things to change. I mean, I'm lucky to have at least seen what I think is significant change in attitudes of people. It's not enough. It never will be enough. But we need to constantly keep up both the pressure from civil society groups and activists, as well as from academics and scholars and media, to make sure that the narrative is always flowing. This contestation is always taking place, because without contestation, there won't be change. We don't accept things as they are. That's why we have some sort of a conflict in terms of the issues which are raised as far as the Northeast is concerned, the problems of discrimination and so on. So yeah.
And there's another question.
And I think another thing is that you must have more films, more popular or more commercial films, more television series that tell the stories of the region much more compellingly more visually than we can do in our books, which have a limited audience. Sorry.
So there's one question. Considering the complexities of the region, how do we attempt to understand CAA and NRC in its context? Would you like to take that, Sanjoy?
I think you and Sanjoy should take that up. I'd rather stay out of this one. Because I think
I'm just the moderator.
No, but I think...
No, this is a panel. We'll ask the moderator also for our views.
Because I think it's an hour that we have been speaking, and people may be sick of us already.
Well, that's why they're asking questions. So I put that question to the moderator. Please respond to that. I'll add.
Okay. So, I think because of the lockdown, I've stopped thinking about the NRC and CA right now. Everything has come to a standstill, but yeah, there are, let's get back to, okay. There is one more query. Can one move beyond violence and yet talk about...
Look, Teresa, You've taken the easy option out, okay? That's a cop out if I ever saw one. These issues will come back, whether there is a lockdown or not, because they're in the hearts of people, they're concerns of people. And the issue of the CA and the NRC is different in Assam and the Northeast than it is to the rest of India.
Definitely.
In India, seems to be some, concern that one minority group will get discriminated against and all that. In Assam and the Northeast, we are saying that we don't want any outsiders to come. It doesn't matter what the religion is. That is the basic difference, no? And as far as the NRC is concerned, people may say it's done well or it's done badly, but the fact is that you have 1.9 million people, yet still from August till today, they're hanging in limbo because they're not able to go forward and contest the stripping of their citizenship or the effort to strip them of their citizenship. So these are issues which will go on, and whether the NRC was done well or not is not in contest. The thing is that it was something that many people agreed should be done. But then there is a problem which has not even been resolved because of the way it was being driven by the Supreme Court and so on. So, there are issues. Yeah. Because people like to
COVID has
simplify
made
things.
universal citizens of us all. We're all in the same boat, and we just hope the boat doesn't lead to a COVID center. But I think also, as Sanjoy is saying, once this is over, then these buried issues will probably return. I am hopeful, though, that this whole NRC execution, at least, I don't know about Assam, but for the rest of India, I hope that has been postponed for a while, because I really don't see it doing much for anybody going forward.
And I think yesterday when we spoke, we talked about, when you talk about understanding the Northeast, can we create an understanding through our food? I mean, you see a lot of space for different cuisines from the Northeast, bringing in big metros. So can ethnic food from the region are readily available now. So do you think food and music can be ways to bridge the gap?
Nilanjan, you better go on this. You're a dramatist and a playwright and an actor also.
Problem is, I don't go out to eat much, and so
you have to that the food in your house must be so good. You have to call us home. What is
that is true. In fact, I emailed you after the book was published saying, please come down and have pork with bhut jolokia, which my wife really cooks a mean dish of Naga style pork curry.
Great. Well, when the lockdown ends and flights are safe, surely.
But that apart, hopefully, yeah. No, but I think, like you're saying, food in particular, I think I don't think it's anywhere close to a large food category like, Punjabi or, even I would say, Gujarati and that type of thing. It's not certainly entered national consciousness कि आज Gujarati खाते हैं, आज Punjabi खाते हैं. It hasn't, or Chinese खाते हैं, which is also an Indian dish really. But we do see, especially in the urban centers, I think part of it is driven by, again, what Sanjoy was saying, the whole migration issue. You have a lot of young people from various states of the Northeast coming in, and they miss their home food sometimes. And you have these Naga kitchen, the Assamese food restaurants, and so on and so forth, which are now coming up quite quickly, I would say, across Bangalore at least. Catering initially to the migrants, but very quickly, I think taste is one thing that can again cut across boundaries and can remove otherness. So I know many people who don't eat pork in any other form now except the bhut jolokia form and the Naga style, which At least my wife cooks at home. So somebody had asked a question there: how do we improve this whole understanding and inclusion? And I think, yeah, food, music, films are all really, really great ways to do this.
Yeah, and I'll say sports as well. I mean, you look at the Indian football team, not the cricket team. Look at the football team, which is played by more people. Football is played by more people in this country than cricket is, I think, or followed more closely. And you will find that half of them are from Manipur, Nagaland, and Mizoram. You know, so they are brand ambassadors there. You have and you have music. I think the best musicians of the country, some of the best in the world, come from this region we call the Northeast. So I think that those are the key elements. Apart from excellent scholarship, great writing, yeah, I mean, the tragedy is that we don't have great leaders anymore. So that's a different story altogether.
No, but at least we have a chief minister, maybe the only one who strums a guitar and sings, you know, Led Zeppelin. And so we may have the only chief minister in the country who does that.
No, there are two of them. You should have a competition among the chief ministers. I think Nagaland and Meghalaya would do pretty well. I think Assam, I don't know what he'll do, Sarvananda.
And this
and Rio would do pretty well in a competition. Sorry.
Yeah. So
we're being just very facetious and light.
So there is this question where, you know, it says that literature from Northeast tends to be bucketed into either folk literature or else literature on violence. Is that true? And what is the way out of this? In fact, I agree with this because I was tired of the narrative coming from the region for a long time. You know? So, and especially when the books on conflict and violence, books on conflict were very, very masculine. I mean, I always felt that it was like an old boys club, you know, talking about big things like the peace talks, then the arms and ammunition. But, you know, the stories of men, women, and children were missing. You know, so that, you know, so that is something which, you know, we need to tell these stories which are missing from the narrative. What do you think? I mean,
it's not that I've done, I've read extensively. In fact, for a while, I wasn't reading things from the Northeast, especially fiction, to avoid any influence. I've restarted now. And, but I think there are interesting examples which are not linked to these sort of themes. I mean, for example, Ankush Saikia's book, The Girl from Nongrim Hills, is really a crime thriller. It happens to be in the Northeast, and there is a bit of, you know, those themes, but that's not the centerpiece. The centerpiece is really the landscape of Shillong and Nongrim Hills and so on and so forth, creating the atmospherics for a crime thriller, which I found, you know, excellent writing. You know, then again, you know, this graphic novel by Parismita Singh, the Hotel at the End of Time, that has people from the Northeast, but that they are not concerned about the typical concerns that, you know, that you're talking about, which is the mainstream themes. I mean, there is a Japanese soldier who, the ghost of a Japanese soldier who is who died in the battle. I think the Battle of Kohima, was it? Who died in the Battle of Kohima, and he's stuck in that hotel, searching for his comrades, and he doesn't know where they have gone because, you know, the war has ended. So I can't give a statistical analysis of how many are follow in, you know, category political / violence / masculine versus the others, but I certainly think that new forms are emerging, and new ways of telling new stories are also emerging. Maybe it's not a flood, but it's certainly a start.
Would you like to add something to this?
For instance, you have Mizoram. Mizoram had its first fiction in English, a novel in English 4 years ago. And most Mizo writers write in Mizo, not in English. And you know, this point about the Northeastern literature as a category, I don't think there is something called Northeastern literature as a category. I wouldn't lump it, like you wouldn't lump the Northeastern states together. Why would you lump the literature together? There are writers in their own languages and there are writers in English. And they fall into those categories. They may be fiction and they may be non-fiction. Either you have good writing or you have bad writing. That's how it is. It's basically simple. So I wouldn't lump this. And you know, this whole thing about violence, because I write non-fiction and a lot of my work is related to the emerging nationalisms and campaigns for separation and campaigns for identity formations and narratives around that. There is a lot of violence. But the thing is that unless you get over it, engage with it, and move out of it, it will continue to be. So there comes a time, there will be a generation of this writing. And now you have new writing, like Ankush Saikia and others that Nilanjan spoke about, the thing that Nilanjan spoke about, because you have other writing emerging, but this other mantham, this churning, also has to take place in order for new things to emerge. You know, we cannot address new issues without addressing the issues that are deepest to us. If you look at Aruni Kashyap's The House with a Thousand Stories, I think, I mean, it's a very innocent kind of novel, but it has such grimness in simple episodes that arrest you, you know. Yeah, I think that's very important, that we have to move out of this, and it comes through a process. It just doesn't happen like that. It's like the whole discrimination issue. Is it going away? No, it's not. Is it being addressed? Maybe not. Are we engaging with it and contesting? Yes, we are, and we need to do more of it. So we need to do more of everything. There's a question on addressing indigenous rights in Assam. But I think we address that in part. The mainland fixation. Yeah, there is a mainland fixation. I mean, but I think that is largely driven by certain political forces and certain media, which play into the hands of those political forces. So I think the way of addressing it is make your arguments clearly, make them calmly, make them rationally, back them up with facts. Don't lose your temper, don't lose your voice. You can lose your voice in arguments, but don't raise them, but engage, contest, address, and leave the audience to, or the others to make up their minds. But you need to be very clear on your facts and engage in a non, shall we say, in a non-violent and a non-confrontationalist. We confront, but we engage. So yeah.
And there's one question: what are some of the challenges faced by people when they move to big cities? How can the residents and governments of the state help them get fair trials and create a sense of security? I think especially people from the Northeast, when they go to big cities like Delhi and all, there is this feeling of a sense of powerlessness and loneliness, and I think that makes them, you know, gather in a ghetto. So how do you think can, you know, they feel more welcomed, and how can the authorities make them feel and support them, you know, especially mentally support them?
I think we are almost ending. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, and I certainly can't speak for authorities. And like I said, everybody's experience is different. But personal experience, learning the language of the place and trying to speak in the language of the place really helps. It disarms micro and macro aggressions, no matter who you are and what you look like. And it sort of helps, I think, in the whole integration between where you came from and where you are now. This is not to be taken as any form of coercion, but I just think speaking in the language of the place really helps. I really regret the fact that I can't speak and I didn't speak Khasi. I think if I had, like my father did, my experience of Shillong would have been very different and maybe even richer, maybe as rich as my father's was. And language is a great way to.
So I think we are running out of time now. So I think just to conclude, the feeling that there is no need to engage with the world outside needs to go away. The truth is that it is essential to engage. And, you know, in today's world where there is this urgent, you know, there is a need to network with this changing world in a global dynamics, which is evolving by the minute. So I think Northeasterners are engaging, and they are, I think internet has opened up a lot of possibilities, and hopefully in another few years, we won't be discussing this issue called understanding the Northeast, and we'll have a lot of, I think this belongingness, the sense of belongingness is something which I'm sure everyone would feel. And thank you so much for joining us. And I think we can end the session now. Team Belong, how do we?
Thank you, Sanjoy, Teresa, and especially the two ladies there who've been tirelessly translating whatever we were saying.
And
yeah, that's a very good initiative, actually, you know, being inclusive.
Bye, Nilanjan.
Bye, pleasure talking to you.
Bye, Nilanjan. Thank you, Sanjoy. And thanks, Team Belong.